Well, thank you so much, Joe, for being with me today on the Wave Capital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. You are my 88th guest. How are you today, Joe Walsh?
Man, Garrett, number 88, huh? That's cool. Good to be with you.
Great to be with you as well. And you are a former U.S. Congressman, the 8th District of Illinois. You were very much a part of the Tea Party movement
Mm.
due to the recent tragic and horrific passing of Charlie Kirk. I learned that you were like a political father figure to him and that you helped him launch Turning Point USA. And you were very much an early supporter of Donald Trump when he was running back in 2016 and then became president the first time around. And then quickly you started to realize that your political views started to shift and you really left the MAGA movement and you were a Republican candidate in 2020, but you were also a supporter of President Biden. So fast forward, you've been a Democrat now for the past few months, and you've been very outspoken, even of the Democratic Party, from a political perspective as we look to the midterms next year. So looking forward to talking to you all about that. And given the again tragic and
Mhm.
horrific passing of Charlie, want to get your thoughts on all that and what are things to come as we look forward to hopefully unifying this country sooner rather than later, and quelling any political division. But when you think of relationship building, Joe, in a team environment, what does relationship building mean to you, and what has it meant for your professional career?
It's and Garrett, that was a great intro, and it reminded me of what a bizarre political journey I've had. Oh my God, right? From the Tea Party to the Democratic Party in like 12 years. But it just goes to show how crazy these political times are. I used to be a very divisive politician, a very divisive public figure. Trump getting elected the first time woke me up. And that's when I decided, uh-oh, he's bad. I got to stop doing what I'm doing because some of the shit I did helped lead to Trump. And so I've been on a mission for the last 7 years to help kind of heal the divide in this country that people like me created. And even though I was divisive, the old Joe Walsh was an asshole, a divisive, a flamethrower. And I've always valued relationships. And it's really important to the work I'm doing now because to me, building teams and building relationships is all about listening and trying to understand. I spend a lot of time now, most of my time now, speaking with people who disagree with me about anything. And I don't necessarily try to find common ground with them. I try to find understanding. Garrett, I'm a big gun guy. I'm a big gun rights guy. I'll sit down with a gun control person or somebody who wants to ban this gun or that gun. And if I don't understand why they feel the way they do, I'm much more likely to hate them and to jump all over them for taking away my guns. But I have found that when you sit down with people you disagree with, even if you don't find any common ground, if you can understand why they feel the way they do, you're less inclined to hate them. So to me, it's all about gaining understanding in every facet of life, especially when you build teams.
Yes, and I appreciate how candid you are. And it is interesting because I've always seen you. And again, I was in college really when the Tea Party movement started. And
And you said, and Garrett, when you were in college, you said, "Who the hell is that loudmouth jerk?" Well, what?
I actually, and respectfully, I didn't know you until really in the last few years when you
Yeah,
started to speak out against, the Trump administration and then showing more of your support for the Biden administration. But then when I was, reading all about your
yeah.
background, I feel that because you have a unique background and you had just alluded to the fact that what a crazy 12 years or 15 years, really, if you go back to the Tea Party movement and even a little bit before that in the latter Bush years, that you know what it's like to hold positions at a time that you don't share those positions now. So to me, and given also the fact of what happened to Charlie, and again, you feel for his family, we mourn for
Yeah.
them. It's such a tragic, tragic passing. But when I did peel the layers back in my research and I saw the divisive things that he said, that also the fact that you helped him launch Turning Point USA, why do you think people like you were able to move away from the MAGA movement? What was that pivotal moment for you? What was that light bulb that came or turned on for you, so to speak? And why do you think people respectfully, Charlie, in terms of his political ideologies, and for my audience at home, I want to be very careful and I also want to be very sensitive to the loss of life, and it's so tragic. But just looking at his young career of just 31 years or life of 31 years, why do you think people like Charlie didn't change the way you did?
It's a really cool question, and you could write a book about it because and I'm gonna write a piece about it. My relationship with Charlie, and I met him first when he was 16 years old, so yeah, 15 years. Our relationship and how we went our separate ways, it's really the story of what happened to the Republican Party, and it's a fascinating look. Charlie Kirk and I were best friends. When I found out he died 2 weeks ago, I felt like I lost a son. We were tied at the hip politically. He was 16 years old, lived right next to the congressional district I ran. I won, went to Congress. I became his political mentor, helped him start his organization. And then now, 15 years later, he and I are estranged. We're not even talking for 4 years prior to him getting killed. So that's a really weird, interesting story. What happened? And this goes to your question. And the simple way of answering it, Garrett, is Charlie Kirk and I were both Tea Party, and then the Tea Party became MAGA. I couldn't become MAGA. Charlie jumped into MAGA with both feet. And so, like so many stories, and Garrett, you probably got these in this era of Trump, man, so many of us have lost friends and supporters and family members fighting and arguing about Trump. That was Charlie and I. So when the Tea Party for me, my friend, it was all about the economic issues, the debt, and government's too big. And that's why I went to Congress. It was all about the economic stuff. And when Charlie started Turning Point USA, it was all about economic issues. He wanted to expose college kids to capitalism and free markets. Great. So he and I were on the same page. And then along came Trump 6, 7 years later, and forget about the economic stuff. Donald Trump tapped into the uglier aspect of the Tea Party, the cultural stuff, the nationalistic stuff. And so I couldn't go there. But you asked why could Charlie and why did I mean, Garrett, almost every one of my former Republican colleagues in Congress did what Charlie did. I was a right-wing media radio TV star. Virtually all of my colleagues there did what Charlie did. They became MAGA, even though they didn't really believe it. Why did they become MAGA? Because if you don't, then what happened to Joe Walsh will happen to them. And when I decided not to become MAGA, to stand up and oppose Trump, I took a blowtorch to my career. I ended my career. I destroyed myself professionally, politically, and financially 7.5 years ago. I've put up with death threats every week for 7.5 years. So you see Republicans in Congress or Republican influencers like Charlie Kirk, they look and see what happened to Joe Walsh or my friend Adam Kinzinger. Well, I don't want that. I'd rather keep the job in Congress or keep the big TV show. So that's why most and Charlie did that. And Charlie was young and he became very influential. But it got to the point where I couldn't stand what he stood for. And imagine, Garrett, how painful that is, because like again, he was like a son to me. But that's how I feel about my whole Republican Party, former friends and colleagues, but it was always more personal with Charlie because he was like a son.
Sure, and I can sense the struggle that you have internally because you're thinking, "He's like a son to me," as you just perfectly stated, and then it's almost like a divorce in a way, but it was like a
Yeah.
slow moving divorce, and then when he died, it's almost as if, like, all the time that you guys weren't talking to each other, it becomes fresh in your mind, and then you look at it from a different perspective, because when you look at the controversial things that he said, the terrible things he said about whether it's Martin Luther King or African Americans were better off before the civil rights, or whether it's Michelle Obama or Ketanji Brown Jackson doesn't have the brain processing power, right? Those were his words, you know, and they took white people's jobs because they couldn't do it any other way.
Mhm.
And, you know, demonizing people who were not like him. And although he quoted the Bible, and there's nothing wrong with people being faith filled and, you know, following Christ, but, you know, my family, were very faith filled people. You know, my wife's Italian Irish Catholic, and, you know, I'm Armenian Orthodox. I mean, or Armenian Orthodox Apostolic is very similar to Catholic. But
Yeah.
everybody, you don't have to be Catholic or Orthodox. I mean, whatever denomination you are of Christianity, if you're looking at the things that Charlie said were good, but then you try to square with all the things that he said were controversial, it almost makes for a complicated legacy. I mean, do you agree with that,
Yes.
that he has a complicated legacy?
I actually, it's interesting, Garrett. I don't even know if his legacy's complicated. I think his legacy is pretty destructive. And again, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but look, and you and I, right? We go through this every day, every week. Political violence is wrong and must be condemned. Boom, put that away.
Absolutely.
Always,
Absolutely.
always, always. But two things about Charlie, and we were very similar because back in the old days, the old Joe Walsh, I didn't say the shit he said, but I said some pretty bad stuff about Obama and everybody. But I always wanted to have conversations with people. Charlie, first of all, I think we all made too big of it. It's ridiculous how we're making trying to turn him into Jesus Christ. And you had that Catholic Cardinal Dolan last week who said he's like St. Paul. Get out of here with that. And now they want to put him on coins and dollar bills and have a holiday for him. It just shows where we are as a people. That's all crazy. But Charlie was part of this social media influencer thing where it was all about getting the viral moments and the clicks. He was not about having conversations with people he disagreed with. It was all about these quick debates, and you can create the 30-second clip that goes viral. Look at what he was doing the day he died. This is what he did. He would go on a college campus, have a couple thousand college kids there. You can't have a conversation with 2,000 college kids. They'd come up one at a time, and it would be like a gotcha moment. We got to get away from that. That's number one about Charlie. So we've overblown his legacy of he sat down with people he disagreed with. No, he didn't. But the second scarier thing is, and I'm a Catholic kid, Roman Catholic, Charlie was a Christian nationalist. And I don't know if I know you know, I don't know if your listeners know what Christian nationalism is, but this is scary shit. And I say that as a Christian. And it is the strongest force in the Republican Party right now. And we've seen it since Charlie's horrible assassination. All these other voices on the right out calling for a holy war. This is a war between good and evil. The left, I declare war on the left. The ironic thing, Garrett, is if Charlie were alive today and say another big conservative was killed, Charlie would be one of the loudest voices out there right now calling for a religious war against the left. This is a big, powerful force in the Republican Party. To me, it's antithetical to what America is. We don't have a state religion. We separate religion and government. We're a secular nation. You can be Muslim, Christian, Jew, non-believer, doesn't matter. But these Christian nationalists, Garrett, they want, and Charlie was public about it, America to be officially a Christian country. The rest of the country needs to be aware of this.
And where do we go here as a society? Because we can't live in a constant state of division, Joe. And we're trying to find some way as a people, as the American people and the electorate. You know, we have the 2026 midterms next year, and then we have 2028. I personally believe that if you look at President Trump's poll numbers, I mean, he's polling, the last I saw, at maybe 38%. I mean, his poll numbers are dropping. I mean, the economy is worse off, inflation's too high, his controversial deportations with ICE and how he's, federalizing DC and was usurping Governor Newsom's authority in California, and hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs in the federal government. So the list goes on and on. And then we saw his speech at the United Nations, and I personally believe that was the lowest point in our nation's history as a president who was saying one controversial statement, one falsehood after the next. And so you say to yourself, he's not looking to unite the country. I mean, he said on Fox and Friends himself the other week when Ainsley Earhart asked him, what do we do? And Donald Trump says, I could care less. And then he always says the radical left lunatics. I mean, that's really a constant diatribe that he continues to spew. So, where do we go here as a people, not only being mindful of this Christian nationalistic, stance in the Republican Party and the MAGA or MAGA for some Republican Party, but then when you have a divider in chief, still the next almost 40 months in office left, is it going to take a blue wave next year and then a president of the United States of the other party, a Democratic president in 2028, is that going to quell some of those voices that we hear today because of the way that Charlie died? And it was, again, so tragic. Political violence, to your point, there is no place for it in society. But given the manner in which he died and in such a public display in front of all those, college kids and the post-traumatic stress disorder that they probably are gonna be dealing with for a very long time. I mean, but everybody saw it on social media, and it was so unfortunate, so sad, so tragic. So, where does all of this go, in your opinion? Because there's a lot of different forces coming from different directions and a confluence of events that we have to, as a nation, deal with.
So Garrett, I love your question. And by the way, you ask wonderful questions. They are thoughtful questions, and I can tell how much you care about things. This is the split personality I have. Like, I'm all about trying to heal the divide and bring the country together, but we have an immediate threat, and that's defending democracy and the rule of law, because we have a horrible, horrible person in the White House who's overtaken one of our two political parties. So trying to balance, we got to come together, but oh my God, our house is burning down. That's what I feel like every day. So my answer to you is, where do we go from here? What do we do? I think job number one is a short-term political goal. It's why I became a Democrat. I disagree with Democrats on most issues, but this is not a time about issues. This is about all coming together to save democracy. So our job right now, short term, is we all got to be the resistance and the Democrats because our house is burning down. So we all got to come together and help the Democratic Party win in 2026. Ideally, take the House back. That's job one. And then job two beyond 26 is then to begin trying to bring the sides together and have conversations. But Garrett, it's this dual job. If you don't believe my former party is an existential threat, then you don't think like I do. But because I believe that, that has to be stopped. So I go through your question every day. I want to beat up Trump and I want to stop the Republican Party, but I want to also be a unifying force. It's hard to do both, but we have to do both. It's like Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. He first had to win the war, defeat the South, and then heal the country. That's our mission now, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And, back when Lincoln was president, he was our first Republican president. And, when I talked to Chuck Todd months ago when he was on my podcast, he wanted to remind me, and rightfully so, that the Republican Party from Dwight D. Eisenhower to George W. Bush, that's one type of Republican, if you will, in terms of, strong foreign policy and limited government, conservative values, trickle down economics, however you want to categorize it. But to say that Republicans in that era were not for civil rights, that's not true. There were a lot of Republicans who were for civil rights. And when LBJ helped pass Kennedy's legislation after President Kennedy was tragically assassinated, I mean, you would see Republicans still look to Democrats what they did in the 60s and maybe not publicly admit it, but privately it helped Republicans too. They were business owners. They believed in diversity. They believed in the rule of law. I mean, you look at what President Nixon with Watergate, that definitely was a step back in the Republican Party. And President Ford pardoning Nixon, that set the Republican Party back. But then when Reagan took over from the Carter years, I mean, he brought that, quote unquote pride back. And, it's morning again in America. And you know that very well. I think that we now look at Abraham Lincoln, and then we look even in more recent generations, a Dwight D. Eisenhower or Teddy Roosevelt or a Ronald Reagan, but that's not what the Republican Party is anymore. And it's been that way for a long
And
time.
it will never be again, Garrett. It will never be again. You know what I think is really helpful? And I wrote a piece this week about it. It's really helpful to understand why Trump happened. And I don't think the Democrats still understand, and that's their biggest problem. And I don't think Republicans give a fuck. But we need to understand how and why Trump happened. Like Donald Trump, and pretty much everybody knows this, even Republicans privately. Donald Trump is a horrible human being. He's everything you teach your kids not to be. You'd never work for him. You'd never work with him. You'd never trust him. You'd never lend him money. You'd never trust him with your wife. He's a horrible guy. But my God, how did he become president? Well, let's figure that out. And I think, Garrett, we're all to blame. Like I wrote a piece this week. We all got him elected. We all made him a thing. That Republican Party you talk about of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Reagan and George W. Bush and Old Man Bush and Mitt Romney, the Republican Party establishment, they got us to Trump because they ignored the concerns and fears of their base voters for years. People like me got us to Trump because we looked at those base voters and we inflamed them. We pissed them off. We got them fired up. The Chuck Todds of the world, the elite media, the elite political establishment who looked down at these Americans, regular folk, white, black, and brown, who were concerned about things like immigration and crime, and all the MSNBC elite people just like looked down at them. The Democratic Party, elitist Democratic Party, looked down on regular folks. We all created the conditions for a guy to come along who's a total bullshitter, a total liar, a total demagogue, but he says what he says, and the average American says, damn, finally somebody's listening to me. If the Democratic Party doesn't figure out how they helped lead us to Trump, they'll never win. But, and last thing I'll say, Garrett, Donald Trump didn't divide America. Donald Trump is the product of a divided America. He didn't create this divide. He's making it worse. But it's like all those conditions got us to a point where we put a horrible person in the White House twice. If we
Right.
can't figure out how that happened, well, it'll happen again.
Well, to your point, and you raise all valid concerns. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I'm not just saying that to, appease you in any way. I truly believe that because I listen to your commentary on CNN and, I have communicated with other CNN folks who have come on my podcast and, going back to, the Bush years, you were there when the Tea Party movement started, right? And really, Charlie Kirk was inspired by the Tea Party movement.
Yeah.
So walk me back at that time where the Tea Party movement was starting to your knowledge, because you lived in that time in politics. Where did the Republican Party go wrong? Why did the Tea Party movement start during the Bush years? It was a rejection, obviously, of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and obviously the Great Recession, and people losing their homes and their businesses, and our country really falling apart and feeling like it was slipping away from us. And where did the Republican Party go wrong, as well as you point out the Democrat elites and looking down on average Americans across the country? But why did the Republican Party form this faction within itself called the Tea Party movement? And was it the Obama years that, for everyone who voted for Obama, the yes, we can, and looking forward, and the first African American in the White House? I mean, I was a big supporter and I still love the Obamas. I think that they are everything right with America. I know that, as President Obama said it, and the Republican Party have said it, that elections have consequences. What people say about Donald Trump is true. He's a fascist to me. He says everything
Yes.
that a fascist would say. So I agree with that. Was the Obama years, in Trump's mind, a rejection to him and whomever he wanted to galvanize to say, because of the Obama years, we're going to set the country back 65 years and we're going to take it in a different direction? And to your point, taking whatever he wanted from the Tea Party movement and then taking it to a totally different direction and bringing people like Charlie Kirk with him. So, should all that be true as well?
So and by the way, the Democratic Party is kind of going through what the Republican Party went through 15 years ago with the Tea Party. I think the Democratic Party is having their Tea Party moment right now. And the Tea Party was, it was 100% anti-establishment. It was a populist movement. We're living in a populist moment. We've been in a populist moment for a long time. What does that mean? That just means that average people, white, black, and brown, are angry because they no longer believe their political system meets their needs, cares about them. So average people get pissed off. And Trump recognized that. The Democratic Party still doesn't recognize it. And I'm glad you mentioned, Garrett, because people don't remember this. The Tea Party began when George W. Bush was president, and it was a populist backlash to all the bailouts that we gave wealthy corporations and wealthy individuals, and the average person took it on the chin. That's always the case. So it was a populist anti-establishment movement. It happened because the Republican Party establishment completely ignored the concerns of their voters. They've been screaming about the debt. They've been screaming about these bailouts. They've been screaming about how hard they're having a go at it financially, screaming about crime, screaming about a broken border and immigration. And the Republican Party establishment just ignore them, just ignore them. And it's also important to know, and I've been in Washington, there's really kind of like one elite establishment political class. Both parties kind of belong to it. And the Democratic Party establishment, they've ignored their voters, and look how angry their voters are right now. Then we went to Washington, us Tea Party people went to Washington, and we didn't get anything done about the debt or the size of government or people's financial situations. And then Trump comes along in 2015. He doesn't talk about any of that. Trump said, I'm going to build a wall and keep brown and black people out. Boom! Right away, they all clung to him. And the elites laughed at what Trump said, but average voters loved it. Finally, somebody's going to build a wall and keep brown and black people out of here. And so Trump tapped into that nationalistic, ugly fervor that both parties ignored. Last thing I'll say, Garrett, like all the Republican Party establishment had to do is listen to their voters. Like their voters want some kind of America back, like the 1950s, where America was mostly a white Christian country. We had two genders, right? Men married women, women married men. Dad worked at the plant in town. Life was just great. Well, that's never coming back. But these were the concerns Republican voters had, and the party didn't sit them down and say, it ain't coming back. And by the way, this country's getting more diverse, more brown and black, more immigrants. This is a good thing because we've always been a nation of immigrants. This is a great thing. Instead of listening to their voters and helping to educate their voters, They ignored their voters. And so then the voters responded to a demagogue, Trump.
And it's unfortunate and it's really appalling that if Donald Trump was a different type of person, he could have said, "We're going to fix the immigration crisis and we're going to make sure that we can determine our own fate, if you will, by bringing both parties together and coming up with comprehensive immigration reform." But that's not who Donald Trump is. I remember Obama and Biden. I remember them making speeches about comprehensive immigration reform, but getting pushed back from the Republicans. But you, having been a Republican and then independent and now a Democrat, where did the Republican Party go wrong, or where did the Democratic Party go wrong where they were not talking to each other, they were talking past each other and not figuring out how to really legitimately come up with a solution for comprehensive
Well,
immigration reform.
well, Garrett, think about this. So last year, Kamala Harris was in the race for 3 months. Every single day for 3 months, I was in the battleground state campaigning for her.
Yes.
And every single day for 3 months, I heard a variation of the following from kind of undecided, low information voters, not people like you and me who pay attention to this shit. And in Pennsylvania, Arizona, wherever I was, these voters would always tell me the same thing. They would say, "Joe, I know Trump's an asshole, but the Democrats look down on me and they don't understand what I care about in life." And so America, knowing these voters decided the election, and they knowingly chose the asshole over the party that looked down on them, or the party that they didn't think listened to them. And nowhere can this be seen more than the issue of immigration. Trump and Republicans demagogue the issue. They're cruel and bigoted, all of that. But Democrats ignored the issue of immigration. When Joe Biden got elected, Garrett, he basically opened up the border. He basically looked the other way. And by the way, there were folks coming up from good folks coming up from Central America, Latin America, Mexico, way before Biden won in 20, because in the campaign trail, Biden was saying, "I'll be the opposite of Trump. Everybody's welcome. Come on in." And so Biden and Harris get elected. They ignore the border for 3 years, ignored it. And the numbers went through the roof. And so to me, that issue is the perfect issue that separates the elites from the average voter. The average voter, white, black, and brown, good people get pissed off. If you're going to be a country, have a border. If you're going to have a border, defend it. People can't just come in illegally. But the elites looked down on that and didn't care about that issue. And Biden and Harris reflected that, and that issue bit them in the butt. Last thing I'll say, Donald Trump, horrible, horrible guy. And remember in the debate with Kamala Harris, he says, "Those Haitian migrants, they're eating cats and dogs. They're eating your cats and dogs." Ugly, bigoted lies. But again, the average voter said, "Okay, yeah, Trump's a bullshitter, but at least he cares about that issue." And Democrats just ignored it because it was a real issue. We let so many people in, and it just created real problems that we as a country didn't do anything about. And so I think that issue, more than any issue, got Trump elected, and it showed the divide between average people and the elites.
Yeah, and you bring up all great points because I remember not too long ago that, and this was, going back months, but the former secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, he said that the bipartisan border deal that the Democrats worked with Republicans and even conservative James Langford, that to Jay Johnson's point, he said it's a good bill. And those were his words, it's a good bill. And it's the toughest, border bill that this country has ever seen, especially in modern times. And I know why the Republicans wanted to kill the bill, and Donald Trump made sure that Mike Johnson would kill the bill because they wanted to run on a problem. They wanted to run on an issue. And it's unfortunate because I think that if that bipartisan border deal was able to get enough votes where Joe Biden was able to sign it, I don't know if it was going to be too little too late to maybe put that issue at the forefront where that would allow Kamala Harris to win the presidency because that's solving one of the two issues, the economy and the border. But it is unfortunate that bipartisan border deal was not discussed early on in the Biden presidency
Well,
when he would have had the support for that.
Garrett, spot on. You're so right. That bipartisan border immigration bill came along 3 years too late. The cake was already baked. And it's not just that Democrats, Biden and Harris, weren't tough enough on the border. They really ignored it and they made it worse. And I say this for my new political party. I'm a Democrat who believes defend the border, but you want to come here legally? We need more. Let's bring in more, make it easier, make it less expensive, increase legal immigration. I've listened to people and I've learned about DACA and a pathway to citizenship, and we need all of that. Amen. All of that.
Yeah, amnesty, asylum seekers that's protected by the US
Oh,
Constitution.
totally, totally, completely. And that it's got to be comprehensive. But after 3 years of utterly ignoring that one part of it, the border, and the numbers just spiked, and Trump's just so bad and corrupt, he came out and said it, "Don't pass the bill because it's gonna hurt us politically." He just put it out there. I think it was probably too late no matter what. And I again, Biden appointed Kamala Harris to be not like the borders are. Everybody lied about that. Kamala Harris was put in charge at the beginning to deal with Central America and figure out long-term structural ways we can minimize the need for folks to come up. But everybody just believed, oh, Biden put Harris in charge of the border. And that charge hung out there for 3 years. And neither Kamala Harris or Joe Biden did anything about it. They really cooked their own goose on this one. It's a shame.
It's interesting because the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, gun
Yeah.
safety legislation, they passed so much great piece of legislation that helped not only Democrats and Republicans. I mean, Joe Biden would always say, President Biden would always say, my policies help red states more than blue states. And I honestly believe that. But the border is such an interesting issue, Joe. And I agree with what you're saying. But do you think that if you even, whether it's you or me having this discussion for our audience at home, if we really dig as deep as we can in the heart of the issue, in the heart of the matter, is it because of whether it's supply chain disruption issues or whether it's because of COVID? Do you think that President Biden and Vice President Harris in their 4 years were thinking that, well, already we saw under the first Trump administration a separation of families and children at the border where children were lost. A lot of them didn't even find their biological parents again. And because there was such a rejection of Trump's border policies, even in the first term, that the Biden Harris administration really tuned a lot of people out and said, listen, we're going to open up the borders because so many families were lost, so many families were separated. And also because of COVID, and people are trying to flee their oppressed countries and live in America where they could probably breathe better air, eat better food, get better jobs, maybe reconnect with family members already in the States. Do you think that there was so much chaos that people thought that, wow, President Biden or president like Biden is going to be so different than Donald Trump that they were already thinking, hey, it must be a better situation for us to camp out at the border and try to get in and try to cross over illegally, knowing that we didn't have those guardrails in place from a legislative standpoint because Democrats and Republicans haven't come up with comprehensive immigration reform. The bipartisan border deal, like you said, was 3 years too late. And so, do you think that, and I'm not trying to simplify the issue because it's a very complicated and there's so many inculcated parts of it, but do you think that they just thought that at first glance, President Biden is the opposite of President Trump, and we are going to make sure that we don't die in our countries, you know,
Garrett,
COVID?
Garrett, completely. Look, I mean, I follow this issue closely, and I have for a
Yeah,
long, long time. These are good, decent folks who want
sure.
to escape their country and come here. They pay attention to what we're doing politically. They
Yeah,
pay attention to our politics. They were beginning to come up all of 2020, anticipating a Biden win because Biden said, I'll be the opposite of Trump. Now, it's important to remember Trump's first term. The numbers skyrocketed in his first term because
Yeah.
remember, before, he threatened to be tough on the border. And then the first 2.5, almost 3 years of his first presidency, he wasn't tough. And they flooded into this country. And then the final year, he put things in place that got tough. And
Right.
Biden said, I'll reverse those things. So they do listen. And by the time Biden was sworn in, they were here.
Yeah.
But the bigger problem, and to one thing you said, you could argue that Joe Biden legislatively had one of the most successful first terms an American president's ever had. The biggest problem, and this goes to everything, is Joe Biden was 164 years old. And I mean that. One of, if not the biggest part of a president's job is that bully pulpit, is communication. And for 4 years, we had a president who had a very successful term legislatively. He could not fucking communicate. He couldn't speak. He couldn't rally the American people. He could, Garrett, when Biden was first sworn in, and we're in COVID and we're trying to come out of COVID, Joe Biden should have sat the American people down the minute he first got elected and said, hey guys, here's the deal. This is going to be a bumpy ride economically. We're all in this together. We're coming out of a once in a lifetime health pandemic. Here's how it's going to look economically, baby. Are we all in this thing together? And then every couple months, the president comes out and talks to us about where we're at. He couldn't and didn't do any of that. 25 years ago, Joe Biden would have done that. He was too old. And so Republicans filled that void and said, our economy sucks. And people then voted for Trump because of the price of eggs. Well, we didn't have a president explaining the economy to us coming out of COVID. You know this, Garrett. We had the strongest post-COVID economic recovery of any industrialized nation. But if you don't have a president who communicates that, then they'll believe the shit Trump says. Biden was too old. He never, ever should have thought about running again. I don't blame Kamala Harris. She ran a wonderful campaign. Biden messed things up. He stuck around too long. It's a shame.
It is a shame because I really believe that he's such a good, genuine, patriotic president. I mean, I'm a big Joe Biden fan, but when I had Adrian Elrod, when I've had Sheila Nix, I've had people on my podcast who work closely with the Bidens and, Kamala Harris. And, I asked Adrian Elrod, I asked her, where the communication lapses were, or I mean, we talked about how the communication during the campaign could have been much better. And, I just remember even looking at the campaign just from afar, but then really taking a bird's eye view and as being a very concerned voter, I also looked at it that he shied away from, the spotlight because he didn't want to give any Republicans fodder about maybe him being more advanced in age or slowing down. And, every night, the echo chambers with the Republican Party saying that Joe Biden's declining or Joe Biden has dementia or Joe Biden, there's some conspiracy with the Democrats to, there's somebody else running the country. Maybe it's, Jill Biden or maybe it's someone else. I think that if Donald Trump wasn't so much, if or the MAGA movement wasn't so much involved in what President Biden was doing from that standpoint, maybe it could have been a little bit different where the Democrats felt more confident or maybe they could have reasoned with him sooner that, hey, we have to start looking at another candidate, for the next term that you're trying to win if you're not going to be out front and center. Because I know that he did advance in age. I know that he wasn't even the same person he was as the former vice president under Obama's administration. But when you look at all the things that Donald Trump says, I mean, there are things that now Donald Trump is saying that, and whether it's lies and falsehoods that he was always doing from his first term. But you could argue that maybe Donald Trump legitimately has dementia himself.
Completely. Garrett, I'm with you, brother. Completely. Trump's 79 years old. He's nuts in the head. I bet he's got dementia. I mean, he's a wackadoodle. I agree with all of that. The difference, though, is when we looked at Biden that last year and a half, every American knows what that looks like. Like Biden presented as old, like your dad or your grandfather looks old. Trump's so wacky and so messed up in the head to begin with that he's not your typical old. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Joe Biden walked frailly and he whispered, and then, Trump just lies and Trump says crazy shit. But so you think of Trump as your crazy uncle, but everybody looked at Biden and said, well, that's old. That's the way my dad looked. Garrett, it's a shame because Joe Biden committed the cardinal sin. His legacy, he beat Trump in 2020, probably the only guy who could beat Trump in 2020. And Joe Biden should have figured out, pardon my language, Garrett, if I fucking let that monster back in the White House, my legacy's destroyed. Oh my God. I'll be one of the greatest one-term presidents in American history if I make sure we beat Trump in 24. So he should have put his country first and realized 2.5 years in, I'm not running again. Let me open it up to my party and put his country first. Because by having Trump beat Kamala Harris, that's like, and it's so too bad, but that's destroyed Biden's legacy. Biden let him back in there. And then you read about stuff, and I talk to people, Garrett. Once Kamala Harris became the nominee, Biden wanted to make sure she didn't say anything bad about him or wouldn't separate herself from him. Man, if I were Biden and Harris is my nominee, I'm saying, Kamala, call me a dirtbag. You do whatever you have to do to win. I need you to win. The country needs you to win for my legacy for the country. You separate from me however you want to. It was just so selfish. And I don't know if it was him, Garrett. Maybe it was Jill Biden. I just don't know. But that helped to a big degree put a monster back in the White House.
Yeah, and I remember, and I agree with what you're saying, Joe. I mean, I agree from the standpoints of the fact of the matter is, I mean, he did say a lot that I just want to finish the job. I just want to finish the job. The job's not over. And I think that because he, I don't know if he just underestimated that Trump could win a second term, or I guess because his stubbornness, and they always say like Irishmen can be, or Irish women, they could be stubborn, but I almost feel like he felt that if I don't go on to a second term, I know that the things that I'm getting done legislatively will be disguised under a Trump administration like they did it. And that, where Donald Trump's putting his sign on every infrastructure project across America, and taking credit for the bipartisan deal or whatever he wants to take credit of. In a way, the fact that the economy is worse now under Trump, ironically, Donald Trump can't take credit for the economy. I don't care how much he says that, oh, we're the hottest country on the planet and we're doing so well, because we're not. And so I think that voters are now realizing, okay, if we did vote for Kamala, or even if there was a Joe Biden in office the second time around, maybe things would have worked itself out where maybe President Biden would have resigned on his own time and hand over the presidency to Kamala in his second term. Do you think that people were just so worried about Biden's age all day long that they lost sight of the fact that, okay, if Donald Trump comes back in, this is going to be like the first term? I felt like because, yes, he didn't communicate the wins and he didn't communicate how well the economy was recovering. So therefore, people didn't know how well the economy was recovering, and they didn't stop and think about and dissect.
You know what it was, Garrett, when you really look at it, and I think we'll know more about this as we
Yeah,
pull away from this moment in time.
right.
And I know you know this because you alluded to it. There was a profound change in Biden, like 2.5 to 3 years in.
Yeah,
He not something happened, but he really regressed because it was well before that disastrous debate.
sure.
And in fact, remember, Team Biden called that debate really early because they were concerned because the polling wasn't good. So let's get Biden out there early. He'll smash Trump in a debate and then we can coast. So things really changed with Biden. I blame people around him. I think to a large degree, you're right. Biden's a stubborn Irishman like me. And he thought, well, come on, fuck it. I beat him once. I got to keep this thing going. If I can't survive another term, Kamala's there. But
And it was the people around him.
it was the people around him, yeah, including his wife, because certainly after that debate, it should have been crystal clear. But then, like, even after that debate, and then Kamala becomes the nominee, Joe Biden should have been just moving heaven and earth to help her get elected because of his legacy. It's a shame. And Garrett, I can tell you, being out there on the campaign trail, the way it went down again gave that average uninformed voter more material to say, oh, Joe, they all suck. Yeah, Trump lied about a stolen election, but look what the Democrats are doing with Biden, and they're not even having a primary, and they're stealing the primary, they're rigging, blah blah blah, all bullshit. But it just gave material to the average voter out there to say, the Democrats suck too. Look at how they're rigging the game. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame. It is a shame. And last couple questions, see how Jeff Duncan switched parties like you did. He's running for
Yeah.
governor of Georgia. You talk about other non-MAGA Republicans or even people who have joined a Democratic Party or even still stayed in the Republican Party, but obviously don't subscribe to Donald Trump. I mean, you look at the Liz Cheneys, the Adam Kinsingers, and you say to yourself, okay, there's hope. There's hope that we can join forces with the Democrats in 2026, campaign hard for them, and let's hope for the best and pray for the best that a blue wave comes. And do you see yourself like a Jeff Duncan or others who have switched parties and now may want to run for political office again? Is there another place for Joe Walsh? You talk about how your political career ended when you left MAGA, but in a sense, you could do what Jeff Duncan's doing and run as a Democrat. I mean, is that something that you see in your political future?
Oh, I'd love it. I'd love it, Garrett, if I could. I'd love to run for office again. I did not become a Democrat to run. A
Sure.
lot of people do that. David Jolly, good guy down in Florida, became a Democrat to run for governor. Jeff Duncan did the same. I did not become a Democrat to run, but I'd love to be able to run. I I don't know that I could win a Democratic primary anywhere. I'm a conservative Democrat, and I could win a general election in more of a red state or a red district. Democrats have to learn we need a big tent. Zoran Mamdani in New York City, great. Joe Walsh couldn't win as a Democrat in New York City, but Zoran Mamdani couldn't win in Tennessee or Kentucky. Democrats need a big tent, more conservative Democrats and more progressives. I hope to be able to run again sometime soon. It may be too soon for me to win a Democratic primary because remember, I was Tea Party. I'm pretty conservative.
Right. Right.
But my hope and plan right now, Garrett, is to recruit. It's part of why I became a Democrat, to recruit others to follow me, other Republicans, former Republicans, and conservatives become Democrats because this is a unique moment in time.
It is, and it's going to be curious for people like you and me and many millions of Americans. It's going to be very interesting if the Jeffrey Epstein files one day do get released, and will that be like President Trump's, Watergate moment that you know forces President Trump to resign because he loses the support of the Republican Party? Because we've seen people in the MAGA movement, whether it's Charlie Kirk or Cash Patel or others, who want to know what's in those files, and you know President Trump, that's another discussion for another day. Now, recently pushing, Attorney General Pambani to go after his political rivals. So
Yeah.
we're really in for it as a nation, as a society. People are not looking at us anymore, sadly, tragically, as that shining city on a hill. And I really do hope that there will be light at the end of the tunnel for us. And I'm a very hopeful person. I'm really optimistic, Joe. I mean, I really am, and that's why I have this podcast, because it's about relationship building in a team environment, and we touch upon relationship building throughout our podcast from the standpoint of, okay, what do the Democrats have to do for next year? They have to really galvanize one voice, one movement. I like Governor Newsom, what he's doing, how he's trying to think outside the box, and he's taking some of the things from the Trump playbook to try to show the lunacy, or to he's basically trolling and mocking what Trump is doing on social media just so people get the point that is this what we want for another,
Yeah.
4 years of another MAGA candidate. But last question, any final words of wisdom on relationship building and why it's so critical now more than ever in our society? What do we have to do to be better relationship builders in this country at this most pivotal moment?
Quickly, in no particular order, and I'll get to your question. This is a unique moment. We have a fascist in the White House, the very thing our founders feared. My former political party is a MAGA party. I don't believe in my lifetime it's ever changing back. So one of our two major political parties is has abandoned democracy. We need to just face that fact and either become a Democrat like me or temporarily work with the Democrats to defeat that if you want the country back. And I guess that then goes to relationships building because you and I may not have a lot in common on certain many policies, but we try to be selfless. Like, you and I may disagree on abortion and guns and Israel and maybe 7 or 8 policies, but you and I, because we wanna form a relationship to help defeat that thing that's in the White House, so we put those differences aside for now, and we lock arms for now for a greater good, a goal that's way more important than us, the survival of this country. And I think that's politically the moment we're in right now, where we all have to be selfless. "Oh, I don't like Joe Walsh because he's too damn pro-Israel." Not now, not now. Our house is burning down. Our house of democracy is burning down. This isn't about you and it's not about me. It's about the greater good. So let's lock arms with Joe Walsh and save democracy. That's where we are. Thanks, Garrett.
Well, on that note, I really appreciate your final words of wisdom and well said, Joe. I mean, we really have to put our differences aside, even within the Democratic Party. And although there are many people who may have not considered themselves to be lifelong Democrats or even independents, but there are Republicans who are willing to come to the other side and join forces with the Democrats to defeat Donald Trump's fascist MAGA movement and to be able to say, okay, it's not so much about saying he's a fascist because you're of a different party. There is so much quantifiable evidence of what he has said and how
Right.
he's treated people that he is certainly a fascist. And it's our modern day fascist, I think, uprising in this country that has to be quelled because division there is no place for division in society, and we're under siege with division, and it's all about harmony and unity and peace. And let's do it as Americans to come together, put our differences aside, and hopefully we'll look for that
Amen.
blue wave next year. Thank you so much again, Joe Walsh, former U.S. Congressman from Illinois' 8th District, for being my 88th guest on the Wave Capital's guest
Cool.
series on relationship building and team environment. Really enjoyed this candid conversation, and I look forward to having many more conversations with you in the future.
Thanks, Garrett. Let's do it again, brother. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You take care. And I look forward to our next conversation soon.
Thanks.